Ben, thanks for being in New Zealand. We're sorry you can't be at the conference with us, but we're glad to have your input through this interview. What was your motivation for getting involved in this whole area in the first place?
It was paying attention to what was actually going on around me and trying to look past the surface of it. I've told the story before of a friend who asked me to read the legislation in Colorado. Because I think I was like a lot of people when I heard about it. I thought, oh, cool, great, cool. You know, I grew up in the 90s. When I actually read the legislation and realized what was happening, that motivated me. And what gets me out of bed on this issue now in the morning is seeing the way that the corporate takeover has affected this particular substance and those who consume it. So
we talk about the substance. I mean, how has it changed? Because, you know, we talk about Woodstock weed, which was, what, 2 to 3% THC, the psychoactive ingredient. When did it really start to ramp up?
Well, it really got serious in 2014 when Colorado opened our retail stores. So we opened retail before everybody else. Over the course of the last 50 years, it has been steadily increasing to what naturally occurs, as you pointed out, is less than 0.5%. The really, really good weed people were smoking at concerts, 2, 3. We ended up at a national average around 12% over the course of 50 years. So it slowly started to inch up. But when everything changed was when the corporations got involved and the chemists who they had on staff started going to work.
So marijuana was an issue for you, wasn't it? You're an ex-drug addict?
Yeah, marijuana certainly was an issue for me.
And what THC did you start on?
Well, we were Washington, D.C., so I think we had a lot of pride in the quality of our dope back there. But then again, everybody you ask will tell you they came from the place with the best dope. But I would imagine ours was probably pretty potent, 10% or so.
Because, you know, a lot of people would argue, look, we've already got high THC marijuana. you know, I mean, have we?
No, you have no idea. People have no idea what high THC marijuana is. If they, I mean, pretty quick Google search, but people don't know the words. You want to see a high THC marijuana? Look and see what a distillate is. Because this is the future of marijuana consumption in Colorado, and as we go, so will the industry. Concentrates are high potency, not 10, 12%. No, any of that homegrown ditch weed doesn't even belong in the same category.
So why can't we just regulate it? Why can't we just say, look, you're not going to have that higher THC? I mean, have they tried that in Colorado?
We did, but we couldn't get it onto the ballot because the marijuana industry organized a fundraiser and raised enough in one night to buy every signature gathering firm in the state in one night. So it couldn't make it onto the ballot. You absolutely could limit the potency. The complexities of it are vast. You have to think about, and we can, as much detail as you're interested in, but basically testing a representative sample of tens of thousands of pounds of organic material, and then testing it in a way that makes sense, holding it until it has cleared those tests, and then releasing. You're looking at infrastructure investments of 100,000 square feet, warehouses all around, lots of testing equipment, and the acumen to do it. You could do it, but it would eat up, my guess is between 30 and 50% of the profit margin. But anybody who wants to do this has to do that first.
So you're saying we need more government involvement to keep out big marijuana?
Oh yeah, if you move in this direction, you need considerably more resources at the federal level to make sure that what people are consuming is the percentage that you agree is legal, which can be very difficult to do, that it's not full of pesticides, heavy metals, etc., that they're not getting it into the hands of kids, that it's not being put into forms that you have said are illegal, like bubblegum flavored vaporizers. Yeah, it would be a significant investment and expansion of government resources to do it right.
Yeah, I want to come back to the products in a minute, but let's just take the green issue because it's interesting that marijuana is promoted, well, it's been the referendum that we're having is being promoted by the Green Party, and marijuana is promoted as a natural product, and yet when I look at the research, it doesn't seem that environmentally friendly, the water usage, the electricity, the pesticides, as you say.
Does Green Party mean something different over here than it does?
It's an interesting paradox.
Green means environmentally friendly to me, thoughtful, considerate of our future. Cannabis is not that. A mature cannabis plant, it depends who you ask, how it's grown, et cetera, but a mature cannabis plant is going to consume between 2 and 5 liters of water daily. Unless you guys have water to burn here, that's an issue. From an energy consumption standpoint, I did the math inside of my book, and it's an incredibly energy hungry plant. So if you grow it outside, it's a 3-month process or so. It's between 90 and 120 days to grow a mature plant outside. If you do it inside, we've actually got it down to low 40s, between 40 and 45 days. But to do that is constant round-the-clock light exposure, and then you need to mitigate the mold and the moisture and everything, as well as some of the heat that's happening. So huge fans, huge light fixtures. This is not a green endeavor.
Although the interesting thing is, in your book, Weed Incorporated, you say it was just a plant, but it isn't today. So what are we actually dealing with?
We're dealing with, at best, a GMO. You're dealing with a manufactured product at this point.
Genetically modified.
You bet.
That's not a green product.
That is not a green product. I want people to think about the difference between a natural anything, like water and Coca-Cola. They're both liquids, but one's water-based, but it has been dramatically changed. This is not a green, this is no longer a plant. This has become a drug.
Okay, let me throw a few statements at you, which is used by supporters of drug liberalisation. For example, the war on drugs has failed.
The war on drugs is a ridiculous idea and phrase to even use, something that Richard Nixon coined, Nancy Reagan made famous. War on drugs means very little, except we're working to enforce current drug policy. So this war couldn't succeed unless there were total eradication of drug use. It was a war that could never be won from the beginning, if you want to say that. It's so important, though, to remember that because we can't eradicate something doesn't mean we don't fight it. So I would never use the word war, but I would absolutely use the word fight. This is a fight, and it's one that I will continue to have.
Okay, it's not a legal issue, it's a health issue.
Well, that just doesn't make any sense, because to make it a health issue, this would be something that would be decided by and weighed in by physicians, mental health professionals, et cetera, who all in the States will tell you absolutely do not do this. So I agree, this is a health issue, and it's a population health issue. And we know that the more readily available it is, the more kids will consume it. The more kids consume it, the worse the negative outcomes will be. This is a health issue, which means don't.
Okay, but if we liberalise the laws, if we take away the illegality of it, we get rid of the black market, we get rid of the gang involvement.
Yeah, who told you that one? I wonder. that sounds like, that's the sort of thing that the people who lobby for this tell you. The black market in Colorado, we estimate that it's 4 times the size that it was before we opened retail stores. So a factor of 4 increase in the black market for cannabis inside of Colorado.
Okay, why is that?
Because we are awash in cannabis now. We live in an environment where it is normal to have huge amounts of cash that smell like drugs changing hands. Everything smells like weed. You're used to seeing people smoking weed, vaping weed, eating weed, walking around with impunity. And because of that, the black market, what incentive would there possibly be for someone to pay taxes if they can just grow it? So what you have are things, we have gray markets, black market, white market, and gray market. What you have are people who might grow something inside of a pseudo above ground environment, but then sell it tax free. You might have people who grow it completely and totally underground and sell it tax free. But there were something this easy to grow, you're always going to have black market issues with, because people don't want to pay taxes on it.
Another argument is that, look, we've got an issue with abuse of methamphetamine, P. We've got synthetic cannabis being, which is killing people. So better to put them on the nicer, lighter, more user-friendly marijuana.
Bob, what that shows is a fundamental lack of understanding of what addiction is. And when people say that, that's one that actually does frustrate me. Because when people say that, what they're saying to the addict, like myself, is just switch to beer. Just don't use it. Why can't you stop? Come on, just control your drinking. Don't do meth, smoke a little bit of weed. For people with substance use disorder, like me, there's no simple linear switch from hard liquor to now I'll just drink wine, from marijuana to use it to get off of meth. You hear crazy stories like this, but the science flies totally in the face of that. Consuming any mood-altering substance, this one included, primes the pump to consume other mood-altering substances. We have never had higher overdose rates from opioids in Colorado, ever, than the last 3 years. The last 3 years, which have been the most sales. Now, causation, correlation, it hasn't fixed it. We've never had higher suicide rates, ever. The state of Colorado has never had higher suicide rates than the last 4 years. 2014 to 2018 are the highest ever alcohol taxes we've collected, moving up every year as we sell more cannabis. People with problems don't switch because they can't switch. Responsible users, they switch all the time. We don't care about them because they're not the ones who drive the market, and they're not the ones who are being the most hurt by this.
So can we just clarify some terms, because they are thrown around and they're mixed a lot, and the three terms are medicinal marijuana, decriminalisation, and legalisation. And there's probably commercialisation we'd add into that as well. So what's the difference between all those four? Which one should we be aiming for, and is there an agenda with all those four?
So yeah, the agenda begins with the medical acceptance of everybody. And listen, there are legitimate medicines derived from the cannabis plant. There are 4 of them, actually, 2 that are just CBD and 2 that are CBD and THC. There probably are going to be more on the way. There are medicinal properties inside of the plant for sure, but that argument has been co-opted and hijacked beginning in the 70s when the guy who started NORML told us that NORML, the National Association for the Reform of Marijuana Laws,
well,
which
we've got one in New Zealand.
You have a chapter in New Zealand, international, they should call themselves now, when they said we will use medical marijuana as a red herring to usher in recreational marijuana, because who can say no to the sick and dying? So they use them as props, people who really needed help and were hopefully getting some relief from it. So you start with medicinal, and then you move to recreational marijuana. So this is where some of the vernacular gets incredibly important. Decriminalized marijuana is something that my understanding is New Zealand has already.
Well, de facto. Yeah,
Colorado had de facto.
Yeah, police have been told to use discretion and to look more towards treatment rather than penalties.
I love this. Even though we still need penalties built in for guys like me who got into trouble, but decriminalization does not mean you bring in a commercial market. What has happened in the States is commercialization. It is not a simple decrim where, hey, we're just not going to arrest you anymore. We weren't doing that to begin with. It is allowing for a huge industry to set up shop, to peddle their wares, and the worst part, Bob, is to build the rules by which they will be governed. Because we don't know what they're talking about.
Are you talking a bit like the alcohol industry and the tobacco industry?
You bet.
Should we have taken a warning from that?
You bet I am. I'm maybe even worse than that, because before we knew what was happening, these lobbying firms for cannabis had billions of dollars.
Ben, you made the comment about the fact that the law actually helped you. Can you just explain that?
This is so important for people to understand, and a beautiful thing in my life that I get to talk to law enforcement now and to thank so many of them personally, because if it wasn't for the intervention from law enforcement, then from the court system, I wouldn't be alive today. Because people who have multiple offenses, who get into trouble again and again, like I did, we need help. And we're not going to wake up one day and say, it's sun's shining, everything feels great, today's the day I'm going to do it, I quit everything. No, it comes about because you're forced to decision points, usually after rough circumstances. And I would never have been pushed into those decision points if it weren't for law enforcement intervention. And I am grateful and thank God for that intervention.
So is it fair to say that, sort of to start with, when you were first getting caught, so to speak, that there was kind of a health approach, a softly approach, don't do it again, go and get some help, but then you actually needed some tough love.
Absolutely there was. Yeah, it escalated. And I remember for some of my buddies who didn't have a problem with it, that escalating, they just stopped. They just backed off. For me, I needed multiple intense interactions till I got to a point where I was finally willing to say, enough.
So I think some people are concerned that decriminalisation is simply a wedge to legalisation and commercialisation. Is it?
It very well could be. Here's the trick with this, though, is inside of the democracy in which we both live, mine's a democratic republic, yours is more of a true democracy, but inside of it, even if it's nutty, the will of the people ends up being where we go. And so I would tell folks that one, being uneducated on this issue is irresponsible, because you're moving forward and making societal level changes that you don't understand the ramifications from. So get educated. But two, if people continue to decide that it's imperative we move in this direction, as I said in the book, I think there are better things for us to spend our time and treasure on. Eradicating poverty, fixing the environment, things like this. But if we want to do this, we should go very slowly, and it should look much more like decriminalization than anything else, than allowing corporate interests.
So one of the biggest wake-up calls for me when I researched this and visited Colorado and California was that my perception was that this debate was really about rolling and smoking a joint on the back doorstep and getting high and being a really nice person to be around. When I visited Colorado and California and researched this, I realized that we're talking about product. We're talking about something way more than that. Can you warn our viewers, our listeners right now, what are we talking about when we talk about marijuana? It's actually not that traditional view of smoking, is it?
I wish it were. I genuinely wish it were about smoking. That's a crazy thing to say, isn't it?
Well, especially in New Zealand where we're going smoke-free.
Right. How about I wish more people just smoked weed in Colorado? It's that nuts to say that, because no, it's not about drawing a plant, rolling it, and smoking it. I mean, that certainly still has its place inside of the culture. It is edibles, topicals, and concentrates is really what it's about. So here's my challenge. I've given this all over the country and starting to around the world now. Any way something can be introduced into the human body, any way it's been commercially produced with high octane THC in it. And if you find an exception to that, I'll buy you a steak dinner.
Okay.
I mean, anything.
And when you say about that, if you smoke a joint, it's now around 15%.
Oh, no. No, that's what, outside of or back home, or our high point that we've ever recorded is 42% in a joint that you can get. But for the most part, you're going to be averages, probably going to be in the mid-20s.
Yep, mid-20s. So it's grown a lot from the old 2 to 3% Woodstock weed.
Bob, it's grown a lot since 2014 when we voted on this. In fact, in December of 2014, High Times magazine, which knows a little bit about weed, they published a piece and they said, we will never break the 30% threshold. You can't get more than 30% THC into a plant. In March of next year, 4 months later, they had a plant test at 36%. 6% above. Even the guys at High Times were like, whoa.
Okay, but now for the naive watcher, they're thinking, well, 15%, 22%, 36%, big deal. What's this all about, Ben?
It's a huge deal because what this is leading to are multiple things. True addiction to cannabis. True addiction, meaning diagnostic criteria easily, and physical dependence on cannabis. Please, guy, I hope you hear me. Physical dependence on cannabis and withdrawal from, which is nuts, never happened a couple of years ago. The other thing is the mental health issues associated with cannabis this strong. So when you go from 0.5% to 20%, the mental health issues associated with this are significant, and we won't be able to ignore them very long.
And has there been evidence of mental health issues in Colorado as a result of marijuana being legalized?
There have been nonstop examples of this, multiple ones inside of my life personally that I saw inside of the hospital or inside of treatment programs, friends, acquaintances, and a book just came out detailing all of this and explaining about a wonderful book called...
Alex Berenson's book.
Alex Berenson's book called Tell Your Kids the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence.
Okay. So, I mean, New Zealand, we have, mental health issues, huge demand, undersupply, and we've also got one of the highest youth suicide rates for both male and female in the OECD. So should we be legalising cannabis right now? That's a rhetorical question, I think.
The irresponsibility of it should mean that politicians who are moving forward with this, their motivation should be questioned.
Well, they would argue that what they're trying to do is they want to make it a health issue and they want to get help for people who are being affected by marijuana. But others would argue, look, legalising it is a green light.
They don't even understand, they couldn't even begin to understand what's taking place inside of the human brain and body with today's marijuana. Until we get to understand that, we do everything we can to restrict its use, especially in populations like youth, mentally ill, the people who have the highest susceptibility. We do that by associating stigma with it, by keeping people from using it. It stays out of the mainstream. So until we figured out what's actually happening with this, it's so irresponsible that I think there could end up being some lawsuits back end of this, the way that people are moving forward with it. A dear friend of mine who's also a politician and just an all-around good man, Patrick Kennedy, has said that the smart money in politics is shorting marijuana. Because 5 years from now, these politicians who are going all in, I love this, in my country it's Cory Booker, and yours it sounds like this Green Party, they're going to have a lot of explaining to do.
Ben, one of the other arguments is, look, alcohol and tobacco are legal. Aren't we being inconsistent with treating marijuana in a different way?
How about this? Alcohol and tobacco are the two most devastating substances in my country. Maybe yours as well. Alcohol and tobacco, we didn't really nail the regulation of those things. It's funny, they say regulate it like alcohol. So you mean like by far and away the most damaging mood-altering substance that the world has ever known? Yeah, great, sure, let's do the same thing all over again. No, those are not examples of how to do things right.
So there are groups calling for decriminalisation of all drugs. Should we be listening to them? Is there some merit to that argument?
These are the people who wrote the roadmap for this. This is the Drug Policy Alliance, etc.
It's the Drug Foundation in New Zealand. Yeah.
Okay, the Drug Foundation here. So to give you an idea, they told us a decade ago, they wrote a manifesto, they told us a decade ago we'll go medical, from medical we'll go recreational marijuana, then we'll do psychedelics, after psychedelics opiates, and then amphetamines, the commercial sale of these things, so heroin and methamphetamine, et cetera, commercial regulated sale. This year, Colorado votes on legalization and commercial sales of psychedelic mushrooms. They've already gotten it onto the ballot. So they did exactly what they said we were going to do.
But wouldn't Colorado families say, no way?
Because if you put a frog in a pot and slowly bring the water up to boil, the frog won't jump out.
So are you saying that the brains of Colorado people are slowly getting fried? I mean, are they losing common sense or sight of reality? I mean,
I'm saying that our reality is being altered around us subtly. And
so it's a new norm.
It's a new normal. And I'm saying that there is a generation of young people growing up in an environment where persuasive advertising has led to absolute permissiveness where they think they can consume from beginning, where their parents are, their aunts, their uncles, and we won't know the full costs of this for a generation.
So, I mean, it's interesting. Other states are pushing back. I mean, even liberal Hawaii has recently rejected.
How about Vermont? Vermont rejected.
So is everybody just, I mean, is that your message to New Zealand? Basically, watch Colorado, wait 5 more years. The research is going to be even more damning and more persuasive for us not to go anywhere near it.
Here's my message to New Zealand. Colorado, we are the canary in the coal mine. We are the indicator. You need to wait to see if we are singing, coughing, or dead. And right now, Colorado's having some real problems. The data is terribly concerning. The problem is the people who tell you about Colorado are the lobbyists. So they would say, everything's great. Or our politicians, everything's perfect. We know what we're doing. Come on out. We'd love to show you. I encourage you, please come on out. Take a walk downtown, smell it, feel it, hear it, and consider what it's like for those of us with substance abuse issues and even who are living clean 20 plus years later. Every time I go out, I smell it. Every time I take my kids somewhere, we smell it, and I get to show them and talk to them about it.
But that's the thing. I mean, you've got 3 teenage children. What makes you stay in Colorado?
It's my home.
Do you think you can change it?
The question about whether or not I can change it is almost irrelevant. The question about will I push back is central.
And are you the only one pushing back?
No. I used to be. There used to only be a few of us. Kevin Sabet and the folks at SAM and Patrick Kennedy, who's a partner, so many people. But it has changed, because even now the data's so inarguable and it's so large, such a large body of evidence, that we're getting books like what Alex wrote, and people are getting much more vocal. It has become a much less lonely fight to have. Very frankly, I'm on the other side of the world right now with somebody who fundamentally understands this and I can speak intelligently with. Come on, man, look where we are. No, I'm not nearly as lonely anymore, and I'll be damned if I give my state up.
Do you think New Zealand's we're getting the message right in New Zealand?
You and Family First are defining a wonderful message, because you are forcing people to realize that this is an issue of big marijuana, corporate interests. They are always going to push a different issue: social justice, medicinal, tax revenue. Yeah, I think you are the only country I have seen that from the beginning is starting to get a real counter message out that is accurate.
We certainly recommend your book, Weeding: The Truth About THC, the Pot Lobby and the Commercial Marijuana Industry. Ben, thanks for coming to New Zealand.
My pleasure, sir.